And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Saturday morning's flying weather showing a band of IFR with that strong front out over the Bering Sea, dragging across Adak Island, and some IFR along the Alaska Range here over toward the eastern Copper River Basin and north up to about Eagle, and some more IFR up over the eastern Brooks Range and the northern Panhandle, at least to start the day. And then that becomes marginal VFR over the northern southeast coast. But as the next system comes northward, spreading a fair amount of IFR along with the wind and rain into the central and then southern southeast coast, with marginal VFR into the Gulf of Alaska, into the eastern interior, more widespread IFR up here from the northern Yukon Flats, into the Brooks Range out to the eastern Arctic coast and North Slope, and higher pressure. Good VFR here over the central western part of the state down to Kodiak Island, spreading into Cook Inlet and Susitna Valley, with this front pushing eastward here just west of St. Paul Island and IFR spreading in across Umack Island. And then for Sunday, that band starts to weaken as it approaches the coast, narrows a little bit there and lifts north of the Alaska Peninsula. But that'll bring some IFR to Nunivak Island, but better conditions out to the west of some VFR. VFR across most of southern Alaska into the Gulf, Kodiak Island, up into the western Alaska Range here with marginal VFR in the interior. IFR along the eastern North Slope and Arctic coast with some lower conditions, again down the east side here. And IFR over the southern Panhandle and also up over toward the border farther to the north. And for the afternoon, big improvement there for the southeast coast for Sunday afternoon, mostly VFR or becoming VFR and marginal VFR on the decrease. Good VFR into the Gulf of Alaska, westward here to the Alaska Range into the interior and back to the northwest. IFR for the eastern central, well, most of the North Slope and Arctic coast will be in the IFR zone there, with a little bit of VFR here through the Noatak Valley and the northwest coast. And then we have areas of IFR here, northern Bering Sea into the Yukon Delta, over the southwest part of the state here down to Kodiak Island. Marginal VFR to Unalaska Island with VFR for Nikolsky out to Adak. And for the passes, Anatuvik and Adigan both look to be, will be IFR tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR. Forecast for rainy, VFR flying, and windy, starting out IFR, becoming VFR. Isabel, mostly marginal, mostly VFR from Mentasta. And Tanita, occasional marginal VFR there, with Portage starting out IFR, improving through the day. And for Chilkoot and White, IFR to VFR. Freezing levels, 2,000 feet down over the southern southeast coast and out to the west with that storm bringing some warmer air up into the Aleutians here, about 4,000 to 6,000 feet there, with 2,000 feet up into the southwest Bering. Icing, most of the moisture here from out in the south central Bering Sea and then back to the northwest ahead of that front. So that's where the heaviest icing will be, with isolated moderate with the southern part of the front there pushing in toward the eastern Aleutians, and areas of isolated moderate mixed or rime icing here up over the northeast part of the state to the eastern Arctic coast. Also some of that along the North Gulf Coast, and then with that next system pushing northward here, bringing the wind and rain and also an increased potential for some heavier icing into the southern Panhandle. Jet stream showing southwest winds, 125 knots, pulling that moisture northward, with that low center back to the southwest yet for tomorrow afternoon. Another trough here right over the Alaska Range, south central Alaska, with northwest winds 65 knots there from the Chukchi Sea right on down in across the southwest interior. And then the westerly jet here just south of the Aleutians, but kind of poking up a little bit there toward the Pribilof Islands, about 115 knots. And for 9,000 feet, front shows up here at this elevation pretty well. 60-knot winds, 65 knot winds in advance of that, kind of a break right through here and then back up to 60 knots. And that low center lifting northward, staying back to the west. and we got 60-knot winds blowing back in towards Shimei and Attu. And for 3,000 feet, southerly winds ahead of that front, 60 to 65 knots. Westerlies, 50 to 60 knots behind the front there, south of the strong low center. Higher pressure, light winds over the interior, weakening low pressure here, keeping a kind of a narrow band of winds along the North Gulf Coast, and then coming down but to the east of Kodiak Island. This next system here bringing much stronger winds up into the Queen Charlottes and eventually into the southern southeast coast from Dixon Entrance. And for turbulence, we'll see considerable moderate turbulence building from south to north here into at least Prince of Wales Island tomorrow. Light to isolated moderate turbulence from the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, southern Kenai Peninsula. And a big area of moderate turbulence here for the eastern Aleutians, northwestward there to St. Matthew Island, and also back for the western Aleutians.